The Jewish Channel's Week in Review, Netanyahu's online chat with Jeb Bush, new approaches at a Jewish museum, are Jewish day schools welcoming all students? It's the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. If there were any doubts that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would give his planned speech to Congress next week, no matter the consequences for his relationship with President Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, such doubts were completely removed last week with a foreign policy discussion on Twitter. It started with a speech by former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who is running for the Republican nomination for president in 2016. Bush, giving a speech in Chicago, said the following about the president.
And his administration has lobbed leaks and personal insults to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet with incredible regularity. In all of these actions, we see a careless disregard to the long-term interests of America in the world. Instead, what we see is an effort to try to win the political news cycle. I want to take a moment to talk about the controversy surrounding Bibi Netanyahu's joint session speech to Congress that's coming up in the first week of March. I, for one, am really eager to hear what he has to say. Israel is not at the negotiation table with Iran, but it has a lot at stake. I don't blame him for wanting to share his views, and in fact, I think it will be important for the American people to get the perspective of our closest ally in the region. I'm surprised that the administration is upset.
Netanyahu's office took some of that quote and posted it on Twitter, along with the note, "Thanks to the comments from Jeb Bush regarding my upcoming speech to Congress." Bush's office replied on Twitter, "You're welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say." This public flirtation among Netanyahu and Bush is about as clear a signal the Prime Minister could send about his feelings regarding the Obama administration and the Democratic Party, and the approach of both to an Iranian nuclear deal. In other international efforts regarding the Jewish state, a lawsuit against the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority won a judgment of $218 million in a U.S. court this week. U.S. terrorism law might triple that amount. The lawsuit alleged the leading Palestinian government organizations were involved in 6 terror attacks that took place between 2002 and 2004. Moving on, the Yeshiva University Museum is making new efforts to reach its audience by thinking outside the strict confines of its exhibits, as Christian Needham reports.
Music of synagogue life from across different centuries and continents filled an exhibition hall at Yeshiva University Museum last week. Cellist Elad Kabilo and his accompanists conducted a music talks program where visitors were given a tour of and learned about the melodic side of the miniature worship spaces on display in the museum's latest exhibition, Modeling the Synagogue, From Dura to Turo. Museum director Jacob Weiss said the program is part of an ongoing effort by the museum to use their exhibitions as jumping-off points to help visitors better engage with works on display.
I think where we derive our inspiration from is really the richness of this material. The musical program that we presented here this evening really draws on the rich musical legacy of Jews from across different lands.
And the museum has no shortage of content to work with.
So it's a way to really embed content, the culture of Jewish life, the culture of Jewish experience into the exhibitions, and to have these models that are physical representations of Jewish life be, in a sense, kind of windows into the very culture that they represent.
That visual approach was emphasized in another recent program that paired still pictures with moving ones.
We have an exhibition of beautiful photographs by Marissa Scheinfeld of the Borscht Belt, and we brought a film in when comedy went to school and invited Robert Klein, one of the original Borscht Belt performers, to discuss his years at the Borscht Belt in combination with the movie.
Klein gave TJC his take on the current desolation of the Borscht Belt hotels that Scheinfeld captured with her camera, places he lived and worked in when the area was a booming destination for vacationing Jews.
The Catskill Mountains were an institution from the turn of the 20th century for working class people, poor people to escape the city heat, right up to the most luxurious, like the Concord and Grossingers and Kutchers. And it's really depressing to see now. The buildings are a shambles. Some of them have been completely torn down. And they always claimed that gambling would save it. Oh, if only we're gambling. But only the Indians could do that, and they couldn't find a Jewish Indian, which was very tough. They had dances with Kishka, but he didn't do.
To see more about the programs and exhibitions at Yeshiva University Museum, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Jewish day schools are necessarily somewhat restrictive, but what are they doing to be welcoming to all Jewish students, including those with disabilities? Meredith Gansman finds out.
On a recent Tuesday night, Rabbi Dov Linzer organized a panel discussion about inclusion of special needs students in Jewish day schools. But the panelists went unheard.
I think there's a problem that people who need to hear about this don't want to hear about it, and the people that are very personally affected by this know the problem all too well.
Linzer is in the latter group. His two sons are on the autism spectrum, and they don't attend Jewish day schools because he feels the schools are not equipped to handle his children's special needs.
My wife and I are both educators and leaders within the Jewish community, the Orthodox community, and we began to feel really what it was like to be marginalized, and marginalized not intentionally, but by lack of attention and by lack of people being aware of the issues.
20% of American Jews have some form of physical, developmental, or learning disability, and activists in the community say they are not being served by their synagogues and day schools.
Why the Jewish community has lagged behind over the last several decades is indeed a painful question to consider. Perhaps part of the reason is that as an ancient culture, we tend to be a little bit slower and more conservative in response to contemporary concerns. But frankly, I completely reject that response or that thought. We have always historically been at the cutting edge of thinking about the needs and challenges of society and culture as people experience them in any given generation.
But there's this fear, and that fear has a lot to do with a self-perception the community has of everybody as overachievers, everybody as a certain type of a mold, and we really need to work in the diversity.
Over the last decade, Yeshivat Hovevei Torah rabbinical school rabbis have been learning how to better serve children with disabilities in the classroom.
It's not a case of making our shuls or our day schools accessible for them or for others. It's about making them accessible for us, because us includes people with more or less mobility issues, more or less mental disability issues. It's about making a community space accessible for the whole community.
Elton and his fellow rabbinical students also focus their training on community members with physical disabilities.
My father, who actually passed away last year, had multiple sclerosis, and for me, I grew up that if we went to a school or to a synagogue or any building that didn't have a ramp, it didn't exist to us.
For more information on inclusion in Jewish day schools, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, this week on Up Close, we're looking at what happens when we publicize private details. Daphne Merkin is a well-known essayist who has built a reputation for revealing much about herself and digging deeply into the lives of others. We discuss her new book, The Fame Lunches, on wounded icons, money, sex, the Brontes, and the importance of handbags. But these days, all of us are revealing a lot about ourselves, more so than we ever have before. And much of it is going on without our knowing consent. New York Times columnist Jim Dwyer tells the story of those who would seek to change that in More Awesome Than Money, 4 Boys and Their Quest to Save the World from Facebook. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Daphne Merkin. You've got some theories on celebrity when you cobble it all together. What have you found speaking to everyone from, say, Woody Allen to Michael Jackson?
Well, my theory that I kind of present in the title essay is slightly tongue-in-cheek. It's not entirely, it was my own sort of private rationale. Partly I'm not that interested straight up in celebrity.
Right.
The sort of fame obsession of the culture, I kind of look at with a crooked eye, if that makes any sense. So I have this theory, sort of more that the kind of people that I was more drawn to were celebrities by accident, that they were a kind of wounded people who, to compensate for some deficit or lack in their own life, which most of us have some, became famous at something.
It seems like you're looking for something else in what is famous, in what is well known, or in what should be better known, as you were saying a moment ago, than what a lot of other people are looking for.
Right. I think, and I attribute some of this, or I have attributed it to, and I think it's true, some of it to a Talmudic, I mean, I studied Talmud at the high school I went to and always liked it, or to a certain, I don't even know if I would call it a Jewish streak. The interpretive interests me. I think one thing that I'm always looking to interpret, what does this say? What does Michael Jackson say about the culture and how it feels about whatever? What is, trying to make connections, not just simply, oh, he's famous, how fascinating. Can I get some of the aura off fame? That doesn't particularly interest me. More what interests me is the not famous ingredients that somehow created the person.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, Iowa Uplink Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.